What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. And today, we are going to be speaking about the disappearance of Tonee Turner. And this is actually a case that I have wanted to cover pretty much since the moment that it happened. I have looked into it time and time again, but I kept on putting it off, mainly due to the lack of information in the case. I just kept feeling like I wasn't going to be able to get out the most accurate information possible. There was not a lot of clarity in the timeline. So I kept hoping that more information would come out. I kept hoping there would be something released from the police department, a press conference, a new lead, just anything at all to help add details to this case and to help clear up a little bit of the confusion around the timeline. But every time I would check on it, every couple of months, there was nothing. That day never came. And here we are years later, and Tonee Turner is still missing. So I decided I was just going to go ahead and cover the case. I am bringing you the most accurate, well-sourced timeline that I can, built on publicly available information, family accounts, verified facts. But I do need to stress that the timeline does have some contradictory details, and there's not a lot that has been confirmed or denied by police. In the entirety of this case, they've pretty much not really said anything. So let's go ahead and get right into the details. Tonee Turner was born on June 10th, 1997 in Pennsylvania, and from the very beginning, her family knew that she was special. Her mom, Darlene Johnson, remembers her as always being joyful and curious. She was always moving, always questioning, and she was the youngest of three sisters, and her bond with her older sister Sydney was particularly close. They were only a year apart, and they were inseparable. It seems like they were more of best friends than siblings. Now, Tonee grew up with her family in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Braddock, and they eventually moved and settled into Turtle Creek, and this is where she spent most of her childhood. And her entire childhood was just filled with creativity. Even as a little girl, she wasn't interested in staying inside the lines. Sydney actually once said, quote, "She was drawing on the walls of my mom's house until she was like 16. She just had the artist spirit inspired all the time." And her mom didn't discourage it. Instead, she gave Tonee the space that she needed to create. She understood that her daughter saw the world differently in this amazing, beautiful way, and she needed to express that the way that she felt best. Tonee went on to attend Woodland Hills High School, and she didn't just stand out for her art talent, but also for her heart. It was really obvious how much she cared about everybody around her. If someone was sitting alone, she sat with them. If someone needed help, she gave it without hesitation. Tonee had this really special way of making everyone feel like they mattered. And as she got older, her talents expanded into nearly every medium imaginable. She just kept on building in this really amazing artistic way. She worked in ceramics, metalsmithing, painting, dance, skateboard design. I mean, her creativity seemed to have no ceiling. She performed in school productions, she studied global dance styles like flamenco, and always had a sketchbook in hand. Tonee also had a really deep sense of justice and community. She was really passionate about things like nutrition and Black history, and she often brought that knowledge into her outreach work, which she did a ton of. She participated in a program called Children's Windows to Africa, where she helped kids explore their own creativity and their identity through art. She also started to work at the Carnegie Library of Braddock, where she taught ceramics to children, and she had a full-time job at Studebaker Metals, where she handcrafted jewelry and metal art. She was always going, always doing something. And even though she had such a packed schedule with her own full-time job, she made sure she could share her knowledge and passion of things with everybody else. And that's a really, really beautiful way to live. Her friend Taylor Leeper said, quote, "She didn't see anything other than sunshine. She was sun, even if it was raining." Now, at the time of Tonee's disappearance, she was living in the Hazelwood neighborhood of Pittsburgh with her boyfriend and one of her close friends. But her relationship with her boyfriend had reportedly become strained, and so she had made the decision to move out and move in with her sister Sydney, along with a few of their close friends in Braddock on January 1st. So New Year's Day, she had some pretty big changes, and that ended up being 2 days after she was last seen. And from what I have seen explained, this breakup with her boyfriend, it was definitely not something that was great. I don't think either of them were very happy about it, but I've also seen it described as not even a full breakup breakup. They were kind of just trying to figure out how to make their relationship work. It seems that the close proximity of living with each other all the time was just not it for either of them. So it seems like they planned on kind of getting that little bit of separation and moving on from there. And Tonee was excited. It was this new beginning that she had been looking forward to. It was a shift towards stability and support among a lot of people that deeply cared for her. It was a positive thing. She was planning for the future. She was excited for what was ahead. But in late December of 2019, everything changed. The night of December 30th, 2019, sometime between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m., a man that I have seen described as a firefighter potentially was biking across the Homestead Grays Bridge in Pittsburgh, and he noticed something that seemed a bit off. There was a bag, a ceramic vase, and a pair of shoes that had been placed very carefully along the bridge. And the way it's described, it doesn't seem like they were just discarded objects, like someone had thrown them down and run off or tossed them out of a car window. It looked like they had been forgotten or very purposefully placed. And so he stopped and looked into the bag, and there were keys, a water bottle, a phone, and a diary, very personal and intimate things that someone was very likely missing. And so this firefighter gathered the bag and went back home to his father. And they wanted to find a way to get these things back to whoever they belonged to. So they looked through the phone, and eventually they ended up finding contact information. And this contact information was Tonee's aunt, because the bag, the shoes, that ceramic piece all belonged to Tonee. Now, once they had this contact information, either that night or the following day, again, just another unclear detail, they decided to reach out to Tonee's aunt saying, hey, we found all these things. We don't know if you want to come pick them up or have the person that it belongs to come pick them up. And so on the following morning of December 31st at around 11:45 a.m., Tonee's aunt headed over to this person's house and picked up her bag. Now, this man that found all of these belongings explained to her that he had seen all of those additional items on the bridge, the pair of shoes and the ceramic piece, but because he was on a bike, he hadn't been able to carry everything at once. So he just took the bag that seemed like it had the most important items in there and seemed hopeful that the other items would likely still be on the bridge so that Tonee's family could go and get them. And that's exactly what they did. They drove to the Homestead Grays Bridge. They went to where this man said, but unfortunately, both of those things ended up being gone. And so at this point, Tonee's family wasn't really in a full panic because Tonee was apparently known for misplacing things. She was always off in her own world. She was excited about the next thing. So it was just a part of who she was. Like, this was a regular thing for everyone. But when her sister Sydney heard that it wasn't just her phone, it wasn't just her bag, but everything near and dear to her, down to her shoes, panic began to creep in. And what made this even more alarming was hearing where exactly these items had been found. The Homestead Grays Bridge is not even remotely close to where Tonee lived. Her home in Hazelwood was approximately 3.5 miles away from the bridge, which is around a 10-minute drive. And I know that doesn't sound long, but Tonee didn't have her own car. She was always on foot, or she relied on public transportation, which obviously takes way longer than just a straight shot in a car. So how and why did all of her things end up about an hour's walk away from her home? Especially because this wasn't a place that anyone knew her to frequently go. So when Sydney started piecing all of these strange details together, she decided to go to Tonee's house in Hazelwood to try and return all of Tonee's things and just make sure that everything was okay. Now, both Tonee's boyfriend and roommate were out of town at the time, so she expected to find Tonee there on her own. But when Sydney got there, the house was completely empty. So then she decided to call Studebaker Metals, hoping that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Tonee was there for her shift. She had just forgotten her things and not had time to figure out where they were. But when she called Studebaker Metals, her worst fears were confirmed. Not only had all of Tonee's belongings been found on that bridge far from home, but she also hadn't shown up for work that morning, and that was entirely out of character for her. Sydney checked Tonee's phone for potential clues, but there were no recent calls, no strange text messages. There was nothing at all on her phone to indicate where she could have gone or that something had even been wrong. At this point, it didn't feel like Tonee had just gone off the grid. It felt like something awful had happened. And so by the following day of January 1st, 2020, Tonee Turner was officially reported as missing. Now, family and friends immediately began to retrace her last known movements, and that New Year's Day, authorities also issued a public release asking for help in locating Tonee. The statement described her last known whereabouts and urged the public to come forward with any relevant information. Meanwhile, everyone in Tonee's life was trying to figure out a timeline, and once they began piecing things together, it just made things that much more confusing because it was like Tonee was there, everything was completely fine, and within a matter of an hour or two, she had vanished off the map and left no trace. So December 30th, that same day that her belongings had been found, Tonee seemed to follow her typical routine. She worked her usual shift at Studebaker Metals from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and when she got off, she began her long trek home. She hopped on the local bus and went from Studebaker Metals to a place called Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, which is about 4 miles away according to Google Maps, and she made a brief stop at Dobra Tea, which from everyone that knew her, this was one of her favorite places. She was a regular there. And the employees actually spoke to, I believe, either authorities or family, I'm not sure which, and they remembered seeing Tonee. They said that she appeared calm, maybe quiet, but that was nothing unusual for her. That was just her demeanor. And they said that she didn't stay long and left as she normally would. So again, she's following her normal routine. And after she left Dobra Tea, Tonee boarded another bus, this time heading toward her home in Hazelwood. And this is where there seems to be a little bit of discrepancy in the timeline. Some sources state that she was at Dobra Tea at 6:15 p.m., which would have been over 2 hours after she got off of work, while others suggest that this was actually the time she got off of that second bus to go to her home in Hazelwood. And while this is only a 15 to 30 minute discrepancy in the timeline, in a case where 1 minute someone's there and the next they are gone, all of those minutes matter and need to be accounted for. And this is one of the frustrating parts of this case, is that things like text timestamps, receipts if she bought tea, which it was said that she did, and transit logs for public transportation, I feel like could have cleared this up a little better. But so far, for whatever reason, that information hasn't been publicly released, so the timeline is still kind of all over the place on several sources. Now, what we do know is that sometime around 6 or 6:15, which again could be when she was at Dobra Tea or when she was getting off of the bus, she was also texting her sister, Sydney. And from what Sydney has said, their conversation didn't raise any red flags. Everything seemed completely normal. There didn't seem to be anything off with Tonee. She was her typical self. And the bus driver, who also happened to be Tonee's neighbor, was also able to confirm that she did board that bus at Squirrel Hill and exited at her usual stop, which would have been at Hazelwood Avenue and Giddings Street. The bus driver mentioned that she seemed maybe a little down, but again, nothing concerning. Tonee was very introspective, often lost in thought, so that wasn't necessarily unusual for her. So at this point, she should have made it home completely fine. From where this bus stop would have dropped Tonee off, her walk home would have only been 4 minutes. Hazelwood Avenue is a main road, and she would turn from there onto Nansen Street, and her home was right there. Now, there are definitely some wooded areas, and it was after dark, so we know this was at least around 6:15 p.m., and the sun set, I think, somewhere around 5:30, so it was nighttime by the time she was making this final walk home. But again, it was a very straightforward walk. I'm assuming there's at least some sort of lighting along these roads, especially along the main road. So now the question was, did she even make it home? And what happened in the next hour or two that landed her belongings miles away on a bridge? Did someone offer her a ride? Was she followed? Did she willingly go there, or was she taken? And most importantly, where was Tonee now? And so as soon as her family filed that missing person report, they didn't wait at all to start making moves.
A local woman hasn't been in contact with her family since Monday, and as the days go by with no sign of her, they're getting more worried. Amy Wattis is live at Pittsburgh Police Headquarters. And Amy, what have you learned?
Well, we do know this is a very active investigation, and tonight we know that Tonee Turner is a talented artist who is known by one of her employers to have a bright and bubbly personality, but she didn't show up for work Tuesday morning, and now her family is trying to desperately find her.
And we just want to find her and bring her home.
22-year-old Tonee Turner from Hazelwood has been missing since Monday night. That's the last time her older sister, Sydney Turner, says she spoke to her. Tonee was last seen at Dobra Tea in Squirrel Hill around 6 p.m. Employee Marina Feck waited on her. Feck says Tonee is there often and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She said she was there with another woman.
She was pretty quiet, but she's not usually super talkative. Yeah, she just ordered her tea and we served it to her, and when she left, she said bye.
It's what happened after that leaves Sydney concerned. Sydney says a man riding his bike on the Homestead Grays Bridge found her possessions on the pedestrian sidewalk.
Her bag, which had her phone and her keys, a water bottle and a diary. We did look at the diary, wanted to see if anything was like suspicious, and it was just talking about her being sad. You know, it kind of ended on that. On top of that, there was like this ceramic thing, and that's not too crazy because she's a ceramicist, but it's also odd that it was just there. And then her shoes were all there.
Meantime, people are doing what they can to help find Tonee. Posters have been hung on businesses all over Squirrel Hill and on the Homestead Grays Bridge.
We have to do everything that we can to get her message out there and just let everyone around the country know to be on the lookout for her.
They immediately launched a full-scale search on their own. They canvassed the Hazelwood neighborhood and areas surrounding the Homestead Grays Bridge. They also hung flyers with Tonee's face on every single pole and storefront that they could find. They returned to the bridge day after day, hoping to find anything at all that could have been missed. They also retraced the path that Tonee would have taken home from the bus stop. They were checking alleyways, trails, and wooded areas, but they weren't finding any sign at all of Tonee.
David and Lisa, this is the tea shop that Tonee Turner was last at here in Squirrel Hill. It was a place she often came to. There are now flyers up on the windows tonight as her family continues to plead for her safe return. Missing person flyers are taped all over the front windows of Dobra Tea. Tonee Turner's face shows what people who knew her describe as her beaming smile. Turner was last seen Monday at the tea shop she often went to. Her family says they last heard from her at 6 o'clock that evening and never again. Detectives were at Dobra Tea Thursday asking employees when Turner was there, who she was with, and what her behavior was like, trying to piece together a timeline.
And I'm sure her family and friends are going crazy trying to find her.
Police say Turner's from Hazelwood, but she could be in the Homestead area. Missing persons detectives are now urging anyone who's seen Tonee Turner to call them.
If you know where she is, please help.
Search parties were organized despite freezing winter temperatures. I mean, her friends and family walked miles in the bitter cold, stopping people on the street to ask if anyone had seen her. They spoke with business owners, they checked in with local shelters, and posted on every community forum they could access. They were doing everything that they could within their power to try and locate Tonee. And the community also stepped up big time because Tonee meant so much to so many people. Neighbors that had never met Tonee before joined in on the search. Artists that knew her from creative circles rallied around her family. Friends held vigils, gatherings where people could share memories, light candles, and pray for her safe return. And it was evident at all of these things how much people loved Tonee and how important she was.
The small room in the Braddock Carnegie Library behind me was completely packed with people talking about what they love most about Tonee. The entire evening was incredibly emotional, but there was no moment more emotional than when Tonee's mother addressed the room.
Tonee, come home. Please. Tonee, come home.
It's been 5 grueling days since Tonee Turner was last seen.
Sleeplessness, not eating, anxiety, panic, hope. But like all throughout this, there has been this tangible hope. And it's getting stronger and stronger every day.
For me, I'm trying to keep an attitude of her being present. I just personally refuse to accept that she's not just somewhere around.
For 2 hours Saturday night, 100+ people in the small room laughed and cried as they talked about their missing friend, family member, and coworker. The diverse crowd, a symbol of Tonee's ability to bring people together.
She had a really magnetic personality. Something I always admired about her is that she was able to meet a person and they'd instantly love her.
And that's just a small number of people who are caring, thinking, loving, believing that Tonee's home is coming home.
In a heartbreaking moment, Tonee's mother said through tears she's preparing for the worst.
I don't know how I'm going to go on without her here, but I will find a way.
But the group held out hope for Tonee's safe return. Several speakers smiled as they talked about Tonee's love for art, her dancing, and her memorable hugs.
She inspired me to dance when I felt like too inward and too insecure to do that myself. She would move around the dance floor and looked like she was flying.
She was phenomenally creative. She was also just a really beautiful person to be around.
No one could understand how she just vanished in an hour or two, leaving no clues behind. And one of the most frustrating parts of this case is the lack of clarity surrounding the investigation, because I'm sure so many of you guys are like, okay, well, what did the police do? Like, what was done search-wise? Who did they question? Usually in this part of my videos, I would dive into all of that in detail, but I have nothing. From the very beginning, authorities really failed to speak much at all about what their efforts were. No one seems to have any idea what steps law enforcement took in the critical early days of the search. There have been no detailed press conferences, no release of a concrete timeline, and very minimal communication about the methods or scope of the investigation. The only bit of information I really seem to be able to gather was from an interview that Tonee's family did, where it was said that her boyfriend was brought in and questioned, and they were able to confirm he was out of town. I think the roommate was also questioned, and they were able to confirm that that person was out of town as well. So those people had no involvement. It wasn't like a tension issue with their relationship. But other than that, no one seems to have any idea. Now, the Monongahela River, and I so seriously hope I'm pronouncing that right. I always forget to check pronunciation of these things until after they've already come out of my mouth, which is probably not the best practice. But regardless, it runs directly beneath the Homestead Grays Bridge. And that's the very place that her belongings were discovered. And so naturally, the immediate fear was that Tonee may have somehow entered the water. And so when I was looking up this information on what exactly authorities did, I literally was using every avenue possible to try to see if a statement had been made about the searches, if the media said today there are searches ongoing using drones or using divers, and there was absolutely nothing. There's no public confirmation at all that any official water search was conducted using things like sonar or divers or search boats. So Tonee's family and friends took it upon themselves to search the riverbanks on their own multiple times. They returned again and again to the areas surrounding the bridge, walking along the shoreline, peering over railings. There was also a trail, it looks like, really close to that bridge, connecting to another bridge that's closer to where she lives. And from what I've seen her sister Sydney state, they also walked along that entire trail. I mean, they did everything they could to find any clues that the police may have missed or not even looked for at all. I can't even find information on if authorities did any searches along the bridge or any of those areas. I only see what the family has done. And it seems like they not only have had to spearhead this investigation on their own when it comes to searches, but they seem to have handled some of the tips as well. Now, an early tip ended up coming in that led the family to the Hill District, specifically Linton Street. And this was a location that Tonee had no known ties to, and it doesn't seem like an area that she would willingly go to on her own. So from what I've been able to find, this area is about 6 miles away from Tonee's home, and it's not known as being the best part of town. And I think more specifically, there were concerns directly related to trafficking in this area. Now, when this tip came in, obviously her family wanted to immediately have a search done of this area, and it seems that the police wouldn't conduct a search of the area themselves. I can't again say for sure what exactly is happening. All I know is that the family ended up doing it on their own, and the police did offer to send officers to follow the family and ensure their safety, but no official search of the area was done. And maybe they just didn't find any validity, at least in their eyes, to search this area. But again, just another weird thing where I'm not understanding why families having to do this on their own. So family and volunteers went. They canvassed the neighborhood with flyers, they spoke to residents, they tried to find any information that may help verify this tip or lead them to Tonee, but unfortunately nothing came of it. But they still didn't give up. Sydney in particular has become the voice of Tonee's story, reaching out to the media, organizing awareness events, and constantly pushing for more transparency from authorities. And from what I've seen, the tips have continued to come in over the years. Some are vague, some are detailed, and every single one has been followed up, at least by Tonee's family, because when someone you love disappears, no lead is too small and no possibility can be ignored. And it seems like another one of those situations where the family may feel like if they don't, who will? But after all of this time, there are still so many questions that haven't been answered and strange occurrences that no one can explain. So apparently, a few days after Tonee vanished, something strange and deeply unsettling happened. Her wallet ended up being found because that was the one thing that seemed to be missing from all of her belongings. I mean, everything from her phone to her diary, her keys was all in her bag, but her wallet was nowhere to be found, which obviously gets you thinking, okay, maybe robbery. But where it was found and the whole situation is just strange because it wasn't in some overlooked spot or random location. Someone didn't find it, floating in the river or underneath some garbage. It had been tucked directly underneath one of her missing persons posters that her family put up near the Homestead Grays Bridge. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt deliberate, like someone put it there hoping family or someone important would find it and connect the dots. And they were like, why would someone do that? To send a message? Was it just an innocent gesture that someone found it? Or was it to taunt her family? It just all felt so weird because the way that her belongings had been placed so neatly on the bridge, why did her wallet end up somewhere else entirely? Had someone found it and was like thinking they were going to take the money and all these things, and then all of a sudden the person on the ID pops up as a missing person and they panicked and didn't want to be found with a missing person's wallet and put it somewhere someone would find it? Or did something happen to Tonee and someone put her things on the bridge and realized later on, oh crap, I've still got her wallet and have to get rid of it? Or again, was this just innocent? Someone stumbled upon it, figured the best place to put it was by her missing persons poster. There were just so many possibilities here, and no one could narrow things down to just one specific circumstance. And this discovery also came on the heels of other details that weren't adding up to those that knew and loved Tonee. For instance, what Tonee had been wearing the day that she disappeared. Now, reports that authorities put out the missing persons poster, all of that states that Tonee had been wearing a black zip-up jacket. But Sydney, in one of the interviews that she has done since Tonee's disappearance, has stated that she believes it's possible her sister may have actually been wearing a red jacket that day. And when Sydney went to Tonee's house to return all of her belongings, she saw that red jacket hanging up there. So is it possible that Tonee had been wearing a red jacket instead and had in fact made it home, then gone back out for some reason? I'm personally curious if that black jacket and that description that authorities put was based off of people that had been with her that day, maybe people at work, maybe they had surveillance from Dobra T. Again, I have absolutely no idea because nothing's been publicly stated, but I'm interested to know where that description came from and also why Sydney thinks that she may have been wearing the red jacket. But I feel like that's something that would definitely need to be figured out in order to determine if Sydney made it home or not, because that could definitely change things. It's just so frustrating because I feel like even the most basics of this case have yet to be figured out. Everything is just one giant question mark. And so with cases like this, there's obviously going to be a lot of theories, and so far none of them can be ruled out. Now, some people have suggested that Tonee chose to leave or decided to end her own life. She was apparently navigating stress at work. According to a few that knew her, she did not like the fact that she was working so much at Studebaker Metals. I think she was working well over 40 hours a week there. And when you are a creative soul, working all of the time just does not mesh up with the way you want to live your life. You want more freedom, you want more leeway, you want to be able to spend more time creating. And that seems to be the position that Tonee was in at the time. She didn't want to have to be working as much as she was, but her sister said while it was definitely stressful and something that she was battling, it wasn't anything too extreme. There was also tension in her relationship. Again, it's been conflicting because I've seen it was a breakup. I've seen they were just taking a break and getting a little bit of space. But regardless, there was obviously something going on there. And that can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. That can lead to a lot of sadness and heavy emotions. And on top of that, you have to remember the time of year it was. We're talking around the holiday season. New Year's especially is a very symbolic time because to one person, it may be a fresh start, a new year, new positive outlooks, and to others, it can just be a reminder that another year has passed and you're not where you want to be. And so this is a really tricky situation when it comes to what was happening in her life at the time. And this is what is so frustrating because when you see items placed on a bridge like that, it's typically not a great sign. That is something that you find when people end their own lives, when they decide to jump off of bridges and all of these awful things that you don't ever want to have to think about. And we don't even know if police searched the waterway. I feel like that would be well-known information if all those boats were out there, if dogs were out there, if divers were out there. I feel like news would have picked up on that somewhere. So why am I not finding it anywhere? It just leads me to the belief that they never actually searched. But there are a lot of people that believe this is not what happened. That when someone plans to end their life in this way, they're not going to take the time to pull off their shoes, to neatly place their belongings. This is also a very populated bridge. It connects some residential and smaller shopping areas on one side to a huge shopping pavilion on the other side, and there would have been a decent amount of people there. We're talking about going into New Year's. A lot of people are out having a good time, celebrating. People just got Christmas money and are probably out shopping. It was also the time of day that people would be going home from work or heading out for dinner. And so how would nobody see Tonee? There's also another bridge that is much closer to her home, that is much more secluded. And then that also leads me to wonder about surveillance footage. Most of the ways that she would have had to take to get to the Homestead Grays Bridge, she would have had to pass by several businesses. And I have no idea if authorities ever went along any of the routes to see if she was seen along the way. I don't know if there's cameras on the bridge, and those close to her also just don't believe this is necessarily something that Tonee would have done, either run away from her life or decide to end it. She had a lot on her plate, and they won't deny that, but she had plans. She was excited about moving in with her sister. She was making short-term and long-term commitments. She had been texting Sydney shortly before she disappeared. There was no hint at all that anything was wrong. Nothing about her words or tone suggested someone who was overwhelmed or spiraling. And her sister said it was actually the opposite, that she was on the uphill after a challenging time, not in the depths of the worst part. And even if she had needed space, if there was something going on, her family believes she would have said something, especially to Sydney, because their bond was just so deeply rooted in trust. And as I say every other time, this is a possible scenario. Obviously, no one wants to believe that someone would want to end their own life, but truly, we don't always know what someone's going through, what their feelings are inside, what they may or may not do. And that's what makes it that much more frustrating that authorities didn't seem to check the water, because if this was the case, if someone had searched for her, would they have found her, and would her family at least have answers? Maybe. But there are still plenty of other theories out there. And one of them is that she may have been followed or targeted. And I don't think this is far-fetched in the slightest, because one of the first things that I noticed in the timeline was the heavy emphasis on her daily routine being predictable. The same routes, the same buses, the same stops, and that predictability could have made her an easy target. Did someone notice her habits and wait for an opportunity? Was she being watched for days or even weeks without realizing it? She was always one that was dancing and having fun, and she was front and center stage all of the time. She went to all sorts of community events, and if someone had seen her and she had caught their attention, which I think would have happened very easily the way that she carried herself, some sort of weird obsession could have started. Someone could have started following her and really nailed down her daily movements to a T. She did the same thing day in and day out, the same buses, the same walks, the same schedule. And I think it is very important to note that the weekend her boyfriend and roommate are both gone ends up being the weekend that she disappears. It feels like there's such huge possibility someone was waiting for the first moment that she was alone. And maybe all of her things were set at the bridge the way that they were to try to make it seem like something else happened entirely. There was also some discussion online that maybe all those belongings on the bridge had actually been left on the bus by Tonee and someone else took them and just placed them there. That maybe something else entirely happened to Tonee afterwards, and all of these things at the bridge were just like a red herring, which I mean sounds like it could possibly be what happened. If Tonee did frequently leave her things behind, maybe she left it all on the bus, someone saw an opportunity, grabbed everything, and the only thing that they thought was of value was the wallet, so they took it. And I also feel like someone that would steal from someone else probably wouldn't just lay their belongings out neatly in an area with care and then eventually bring the wallet back and place it somewhere where someone can find it. It just seems a little bit off to me. So, I mean, I think that was an interesting kind of route to take things. I don't think it's the most likely. There are also some theories that trafficking or abduction are possible. I mean, there was that lead from the Hill District that especially seemed to spark concern when it came to this theory. And despite the fact that they didn't seem to find any evidence, that she ended up in the area, it did open this up as a possibility. Was she lured by someone that she trusted? Was she taken against her will? And just because they weren't able to find any evidence she was there doesn't mean she necessarily wasn't, because authorities weren't able to go in there with warrants and check certain things. It was just the family looking. People can easily lie and say, nope, haven't seen her here. When it comes to trafficking, there are ways people can move them around without anyone having any idea. And again, maybe they placed all these items by the bridge to make it seem like it was something it wasn't. And then there's also the terrifying possibility that this was just a case of random violence or mistaken identity. Was Tonee simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? But unfortunately, with this case, every theory brings a dozen more questions because there's so little evidence, there's so little confirmed or denied by authorities that now her loved ones are forced to live in a limbo. They're trapped in this torment of the unknown.
Sightings of Tonee while we searched for her, and then I got 2 additional phone calls of people just saying, please go to the Owl Hollow community. I believe that's what they call that area. Ask them, they know something. And then they hung up the phone. We want nothing more than to find her. We want nothing more than an anonymous piece of information that you give us so that we can do what we need to do to bring her home.
People are looking all over because we have no idea where she could possibly be. That's the worst part. There's no like, follow your steps. It's like, we did that for at least a year and a half.
Tonee's disappearance didn't just affect her family either. It shook the entire Pittsburgh community. The loss of her presence, of her joy, her creativity, her warmth, it left a void behind that everyone could feel far beyond just the circle of her immediate loved ones. It's really scary to realize someone can be following their typical daily routine and then all of a sudden in an hour or two, everything can change and there are no answers that can be found. In 2020, a mural was painted in Tonee's honor, and it was placed prominently in the community to serve as more than just art, but a reminder, a promise that Tonee was not going to be forgotten. It allowed a place for people to visit, to leave flowers, to take a moment to reflect on how much she meant and how much she deserves to be brought home. Her story also ignited conversations and action around the disparities that exist in missing persons cases, particularly those involving Black women. I feel like this is such a prime example of the complete lack of media attention that missing Black women get. I mean, there's not even a press conference. Like, there's legitimately bare minimum out there. Sydney and others close to Tonee have continued to speak out at public events. They've participated in forums and advocate for changes in how law enforcement and the media treat cases just like Tonee's. But despite the attention and outreach, there has still been no major break in the case. Tonee's family and friends continue to advocate relentlessly, keeping Tonee's story alive through social media, interviews. They hold vigils and host awareness walks and push authorities for more answers. They follow every single lead, no matter how small or how late it comes in, because to them, giving up has never been an option. I personally feel like pressure has got to be put on law enforcement to at least clear some things up in this case. At least say, what do you think is going on here? What have you ruled out? What is a solid timeline? Did you do these searches? Did you look at this surveillance? And I don't want to put words in her family's mouth. I don't know if they have a good relationship with the police department. I don't know if they are constantly communicating, if they know more than the public does, but I have a feeling that they don't, because from the way that I've seen them talk, from the way that they're advocating and trying to find Tonee, if they had any information, they would be screaming it from the rooftops. So Tonee's case needs to be shared far and wide. People cannot forget that she has still not been found. She is described as being 5 foot 2 inches tall. She weighed about 130 pounds when she went missing and had chin-length black hair. She was also seen wearing that black zip-up jacket that I told you guys could be a red one, grayish cargo pants, and a gray shirt that said Habla Español in orange on the back. And she also could have possibly been wearing a head wrap at the time. She has a pretty distinct tattoo of a spiral pattern on her left shoulder, and she also has piercings in her nose, her ears, and her lower lip. Her family deserves answers, and Tonee deserves to be brought home. So please, if you are able to, share share this case, share her missing persons poster, and if you know anything at all that could help bring peace to her family, now is the time to speak up. I will have all of the contact information that you need down below so you can get any tips or information that you have into the right hands. On that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Tonee's story. I'm interested to see what your opinions are down below. If you live in the area, if you're familiar with that river, you know, what are your opinions on this? Do you know any search and rescues or any volunteers that can come out and help this family in any way? If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video.